Alright, we have already learned quite a lot about reactive forms. We know what Angular directives are responsible for this kind of form and how they relate to each other. We can also bind our form data to the actual form controls, and finally we can group them. In real applications, the interaction with the form almost always ends up with the form submission, and this is exactly what we will talk about in this lesson. It is quite simple to achieve, so this video is going to be quite short. If you remember the source code of the form group directive, it handles already the native submit event that might happen on the form. Inside the handler, Angular prevents the default behavior of the form by returning false, and it emits the custom ng submit event and provides the native event as an emitted value, so we can work with that. Besides that, there happens the synchronization of values and control states before the submission, and it sets up the status submitted for the form. About form statuses we will talk later in this course. So, since Angular already listens for the native submit event, we don't need to do that one more time. I would rather listen for the ng submit event and will be reacting to that. It will be handled by a dedicated handler that takes a native submit event. Actually, we'll not be using it in our case, but I will leave it just as a reminder that it is possible. Okay, then obviously I have to create this handler in my component file. Here you can already do whatever you want with the form data, which is stored, by the way, in the form's value property. And I will just console log it, but you could do something like HTTP calls or dispatch a Redux event with this data. It is actually up to you. And because I can already see the form value by submitting the form, I don't need to print this data here in my template anymore, so I'm going to remove it. Done. That's basically it. And before we end, I just wanted to leave a few remarks. First one, why it is better to listen for submit event rather than click event on the button? Well, the thing is that the form submission can happen not only by clicking the button. It might happen when you are focused on the form field and press the enter key, or the submission might be triggered programmatically by some other JavaScript code. In the last two cases, your onSubmit handler will not be invoked because you handle only the click event on submit button and not the submission of the form. The second one, why not listen for the native submit event in the form, and why should we listen for the ng submit one? Well, basically you could do that, but you should keep in mind that the execution flow of your callbacks will be slightly different, because look, when you call it like that, then the flow is the following. OnSubmit handler in form group directive is completely executed and the default event is prevented, and only then the onSubmit handler from my component will be invoked. But if we revert back to the flow with ng submit event, then happens the following. OnSubmit handler in form group directive starts to execute. It comes to ng submit emission, and here is attention. It is a synchronous operation. Yeah, event emitters in Angular are synchronous actually. So it means that first it will be executed my callback inside the component, and only then will be executed return false that actually prevents the default behavior of this event. So in such a way, you achieve better consistency in the execution flow, and I would recommend sticking to this approach. If you don't believe me, I will quickly show it to you. Here's the debugger. I set up 3 breakpoints. One is in my component on submit handler, and the rest of them are in the handler of the form group directive. The one is in the very beginning and the second one at the very end. And if I try to submit the button, you can see that the breakpoint of the form group directive handler was invoked first. Then my callback in the component was triggered, and only after that the control is returned back to the form control directive handler and it returns false. Try to do the same experiment using the native submit event in your form and you will see the difference. And by the way, it is also true for the template driven forms as well.